Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
I want you to take a second and just imagine your work email inbox.
Oh, yeah, the one we all stare at for like 8 hours a day.
Right, exactly. And I don't mean your personal spam folder, the one cluttered with those bizarre diet pills or like notifications that you've won a lottery you never even entered.
Oh, the classic Nigerian prince scam.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But put that out of your mind. I want you to picture your real, everyday, completely mundane work inbox.
The boring stuff.
Right. It's filled with routine calendar invites, PDFs of vendor invoices, maybe a quick question from your boss.
Or a chain of updates on that big project you're managing.
Yes, exactly. Now hold that image in your head and consider this. What if every single one of those boring, mundane emails was quietly being read by someone else?
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. And not by like an automated spam filter. I mean a global syndicate of criminals.
Wow.
Yeah, just sitting there, watching your daily routine, learning your company's rhythm, and, just waiting.
And for over 1,000 victims, that nightmare wasn't just a hypothetical scenario. It was their actual reality.
Right, and that silent monitoring, it resulted in a staggering $215 million stolen.
It is just a genuinely terrifying number. I mean, 215 million.
Massive.
But, the financial loss almost takes a back seat to the psychological violation of it all. What makes this so unsettling is how incredibly quiet the entire operation was.
Yeah, for months on end.
Exactly, for months before anyone even realized they were being robbed.
And uncovering exactly how they pulled off that silent robbery is our mission for today.
I'm ready.
We are doing a deep dive into the mechanics of what law enforcement calls a business email compromise scheme.
Or BEC for short.
Right. And our sources for today are a freshly unsealed April 30th, 2026 Department of Justice press release out of the Northern District of Ohio.
Which has some wild details.
Oh, absolutely wild. And we also have this fascinating excerpt detailing the architecture of Nigerian email fraud networks.
Yeah, the structure of how they operate is just mind-blowing.
So we're going to unpack the specific, really chilling method they used. Because this wasn't about breaking down digital doors.
No, not at all.
It was about hacking, monitoring, and then customizing fraud to essentially weaponize people's own identities against them.
To really wrap our heads around a $215 million theft, we have to fundamentally shift how we picture a heist.
Right, because usually we think of movies.
Exactly. We are so conditioned to imagine, alarms blaring, vault doors being blown open.
Or even in the digital world, like red screens flashing with massive ransomware demands.
Yes, exactly. But this wasn't any of that. We really have to start with a silent, totally invisible digital break-in.
Because the initial fitness of this operation, which the sources note was orchestrated by Nigerian-linked fraud organizations, it turns our normal understanding of a hack completely upside down.
It really does.
Like when you or I think of a cyber attack, we usually think of a smash and grab.
Right. A hacker gets in, steals a database of credit cards, locks the system, demands some crypto ransom, and then just disappears.
But grabbing data wasn't the goal here at all.
No. The initial breach was really just the laying of a foundation.
Right.
The whole objective was to compromise individual email accounts across various businesses and organizations, and then do absolutely nothing.
Which is the craziest part to me.
I know. They didn't lock the legitimate users out of their accounts. They didn't even change the passwords.
Wow.
And they definitely didn't send out immediate demands for cash. They simply established a foothold and watched.
So they're essentially setting up a digital stakeout inside someone's work computer.
That is a perfect way to describe it. A digital stakeout.
Yeah.
They were conducting this deeply invasive surveillance on the everyday communications of the compromised users.
Just reading everything.
Everything. The goal at this stage was purely intelligence gathering. They were mapping out the entire ecosystem of the victim's business practices.
So they wanted to know who everyone was.
Exactly. They needed to know the cast of characters, like who is the CEO, who is the accounts payable clerk.
Who actually has the authority to send money.
Right, and they wanted to see the paper trail. What does a standard invoice from a major supplier actually look like?
The fonts, the logos.
Down to the smallest detail. What specific terminology or project codes or even internal company slang do they use when requesting a wire transfer?
Oh man, the slang. That's so specific.
It is. They were building a comprehensive psychological and operational profile of their target, and it was based entirely on the digital footprint left in that inbox.
It reminds me of a burglar, but a deeply unsettling one.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't the burglar who kicks your front door in at 2 in the morning to grab your flat-screen TV and run.
Right, the smash and grab.
Yeah. This is a burglar who picks the lock, sneaks in, and then secretly lives in your attic for a month.
Oh, that is so creepy. But accurate.
Right. They learned your family schedule. They memorize the specific way you talk to your spouse.
They figure out exactly where the spare keys are kept.
Exactly. And they know what day the landscaper comes to ask for payment. They just learn the total rhythm of your life.
It's intimate.
It is. But hang on, I do have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because we've all been taking those mandatory corporate cybersecurity trainings for like a decade now.
Oh, yeah, the endless video modules.
Right. And when we hear email fraud, we are specifically trained to look for glaring typos.
Right, bad spelling.
Terrible grammar, or a totally bizarre request from a foreign prince asking us to go buy $2,000 in iTunes gift cards.
Which people still fall for, surprisingly.
I do. But if this syndicate is targeting massive corporate accounting departments, how on earth did this method completely bypass our usual scam detectors?
Well, that is the genius of it, and the danger of the monitoring phase.
Okay.
You are absolutely right that we are trained to spot anomalies. We spot bad spelling or out-of-character requests. But the co-conspirators in this network spent weeks, sometimes even months, familiarizing themselves with the victim's activities specifically to eliminate those anomalies.
So they just blended in.
Completely. When you know exactly how a person does business, you know exactly what to ask for and exactly how to ask for it.
That makes sense.
The era of the poorly spelled, mass-blasted scam email is effectively over when it comes to these high-stakes heists.
Wow.
The fraudsters are utilizing what we call weaponized context.
Weaponized context. I like that phrase.
It's terrifying, right?
Yeah. So instead of guessing what might trick you, they are using your own history to build a trap you can't possibly see.
Precisely.
So how does that actually look when they decide it's finally time to pull the trigger?
Well, it looks like a completely normal Tuesday afternoon at the office.
Oh, boy.
Right. Once the syndicate had gathered sufficient intelligence, say, they noticed a large quarterly payment was coming due to a regular supplier.
Because they've been reading the emails about it.
Exactly. That's when they would strike. They would send a highly targeted, fraudulent email requesting that routine payment.
Okay.
And the crucial mechanism here is that they would send it either directly from the hacked victim's own account or to a regular contact of the victim using an expertly spoofed address.
That's the part that really gets under your skin.
Yeah.
The email is literally coming from inside the house.
Yes.
It's landing in your inbox from the legitimate, completely verified email address of the coworker or the vendor you've trusted for years.
And because of that intimate familiarity with the business activities, the requests felt entirely organic.
Right. It's not out of the blue.
Exactly. They didn't suddenly ask for a wire transfer to an unknown offshore bank with zero explanation. The emails were perfectly crafted clones of legitimate transactions.
So they looked identical.
Identical. They attach PDFs that use the correct company logos, the right font, the actual project codes you'd been discussing the week prior.
Oh my gosh, the project codes.
Yeah.
That's so sneaky.
They even mimic the conversational tone of the sender. So, like, if your vendor usually signs off with cheers, the scammer signed off with cheers.
Wow.
To the person sitting at their desk processing the payment, the request was frictionless because it fit seamlessly into the established pattern of their day.
So what was the catch?
The only thing the scammer changed was the routing number at the very bottom of the invoice.
Which completely removes the human friction.
Exactly.
I mean, if it looks right, sounds right, and comes from the person you were expecting an invoice from anyway, you don't call a double check.
Why would you?
Right, you just click approve. And the scale of the damage outlined in the Department of Justice release shows just how devastatingly effective this customized illusion is.
It's massive.
We aren't talking about a few $100 here. The wire transfers sent by these trick victims range from tens of thousands of dollars to millions.
Yeah. The sources highlight one particular instance that really puts the raw danger of this method into sharp focus.
Oh yeah, I read this part.
A single victim business was manipulated into sending $2.7 million in a single transaction.
One business sent $2.7 million, thinking it was just a routine invoice.
Correct.
That's unbelievable.
$2.7 million wired directly to a bank account that was actually controlled by a fraudulent shell company.
And no one noticed.
It happened smoothly, all because the email request had the right context.
I really want you, the listener, to stop and think about that for a second. Just think about the last invoice you approved at your job or the last payment you sent to a contractor.
Yeah, put yourself in their shoes.
If that email sounded exactly like your most trusted vendor, if it referenced the current project you were stressed about, if it used the exact PDF formatting they always use.
And came from their actual email address.
Right. Would you have caught a slightly altered bank routing number at the bottom of page 2?
Probably not.
Would you have had any logical reason to suspect that the person typing that message wasn't your vendor in the next state over, but a syndicate operator sitting halfway across the world?
It is a profound manipulation. You know, they didn't have to hack the bank's mainframe to steal the money.
Right. No laser grids or anything.
Exactly. They hacked the human relationship and just let the victims send the money themselves.
But, the story can't just end with the victim clicking send.
No, it really just begins there.
Because tricking a company into wiring $2.7 million is really only half the battle.
Oh, for sure.
Like if I manage to steal a massive corporate wire transfer, I can't exactly deposit that into my personal checking account at the local branch, pay taxes on it, and go buy groceries.
Right. The IRS might have some questions.
Yeah, it raises a massive logistical nightmare for the criminals. Where does $215 million of stolen corporate funds actually go?
Which brings us to the really critical infrastructure of modern cybercrime.
Okay, lay it on me.
Stealing the money digitally is almost the easy part. The true challenge is making that money usable in the physical world.
Right, cashing out.
Exactly. Once the conspirators obtained these massive payments, they had to move the funds quickly before the victims realized they'd been tricked and tried to reverse the wires.
Because there's always a window where a wire can be stopped.
Right. So to do that, the syndicate relied on a massive, highly complex web of fraudulently created bank accounts and cash transfer systems.
Laundering.
Yes. They had to launder the money to wash away the digital trail, linking it to the initial fraud.
And the sources zoom in heavily on one specific bottleneck in this laundering network.
They do.
To understand the getaway, we really have to look at Chicago. Specifically, a 69-year-old man named Lon Goodman from Whiting, Indiana.
Lon Goodman is such a fascinating, pivotal figure here because he illustrates how digital theft relies on physical accomplices.
Right, you need a guy on the ground.
Exactly. He owned and operated the new Dalton Currency Exchange in the Chicago area.
Okay.
Now, a currency exchange is typically a place people go to cash paychecks, pay utility bills, or, get money orders.
Just a normal neighborhood spot.
Right, but this wasn't a small-time operation for the syndicate. This single money service business processed approximately $50 million of the stolen funds.
Wait, $50 million flowing through a single neighborhood currency exchange?
Yes. Converted directly into cashier's checks.
Okay, we need to pause on that because the mechanics are vital here. Why cashier's checks? Why not just keep wiring the money from bank to bank to hide it?
Well, because digital wires always leave a digital trail.
Oh.
A cashier's check is different. When you get a cashier's check, the funds are drawn against the bank's own account, not your personal account.
So it's basically guaranteed money.
Exactly. They represent guaranteed funds. Once that stolen digital wire is converted into a physical cashier's check, it becomes incredibly liquid.
Almost like cash.
It's essentially as good as untraceable cash. It totally severs the digital link back to the compromised business email.
But how does a local currency exchange process $50 million in cashier's checks without setting off every single alarm bell in the federal financial system?
That is the million-dollar question, or I guess the $50 million question.
Right. I mean, at what point does the business owner go from casually looking the other way to becoming a vital gear in the criminal machine?
Well, the Department of Justice makes it very clear that Goodman was absolutely a vital gear.
He wasn't just tricked.
Oh, no. This wasn't a case of a naive business owner being fooled. He actively facilitated the willful blindness required to wash this money.
Wow.
Let's look at how he actually operated. Federal law requires money service businesses to follow strict KYC, or Know Your Customer, regulations.
Right, the anti-money laundering stuff.
Exactly. You have to verify identities, keep detailed records, and report suspicious massive transactions.
And I'm guessing he completely ignored those regulations.
He obliterated them. He routinely accepted cashier's checks from co-conspirators who were standing right in front of him, presenting blatantly false identifications.
With fake IDs.
Yeah, and he cashed checks that were made payable to entirely different people who weren't even in the room.
Are you kidding me?
Nope. He logged false KYC information into his systems to make the transactions look legitimate on paper to regulators.
It's astounding. He was providing the essential service of turning dirty digital ones and zeros into clean, negotiable paper.
And his complicity goes even deeper than that. Banks actually noticed the suspicious activity.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. They explicitly warned Goodman that the checks he was processing were obtained with stolen funds or had been returned as fraudulent.
So he knew. He absolutely knew the money was dirty.
Oh, 100%. But instead of stopping, he just adapted.
What did he do?
When the heat turned up and it became too risky to accept cashier's checks in an individual's name, he simply shifted tactics.
Got it.
He started accepting checks from those exact same individuals that were now made payable to shell companies.
Just changing the name on the paper. And for the listener, a shell company is basically a business that exists only on paper.
Right.
It has no office, no employees, no actual operations. It exists purely as a legal entity to open a corporate bank account. So Goodman sees the individual names are getting flagged, and he just tells the criminals, hey, write the checks to a fake corporate name instead, and he just keeps cashing them.
Yep. The money kept flowing just under a slightly more obscured layer of paperwork.
That is wild.
You cannot run a $215 million international fraud ring without someone willing to stand at the counter and wash the funds.
Right.
That is why Goodman, along with 24 other individuals, eventually found themselves in the crosshairs of a massive federal takedown.
So you have this massive fire hose of dirty money flowing out of a currency exchange in Chicago. And you have victims waking up to realize they've been robbed of millions of dollars.
A terrible realization.
And the scale of the fallout is just massive.
Yeah.
The sources show they weren't just hitting a couple of tech companies in Silicon Valley. Victims spanned 47 U.S. states and 19 different countries.
It was a truly borderless crime. The syndicate hit businesses in Canada, Mexico, Great Britain, Germany, Italy, the United Arab Emirates, Malaysia, Australia.
Wow.
The global reach was just remarkable.
But, you know, the geographical detail that really stuck with me in the press release was where the hammer actually dropped.
Oh, yeah.
The DOJ highlights how victim businesses in Ohio were hit incredibly hard.
Right, the Northern District.
Yeah. And we aren't talking about massive, faceless, multinational corporations in major metropolises. We're talking about businesses in places like Norwalk, Kent, Akron, Hudson, Maple Heights.
Westfield Center, New Regal, Greenwich.
Exactly. These are everyday American towns. It really brings the reality of global cybercrime right down to Main Street.
It totally highlights the indiscriminate nature of the targeting.
Right.
The syndicate didn't care if you were a global shipping conglomerate in the UAV or a mid-sized manufacturing plant in Kent, Ohio.
If you had money, they wanted it.
If you had a business, an inbox, and vendors to pay, you were a target.
Simple as that.
But that widespread devastation is also exactly what triggered such a massive interagency response.
Because this wasn't a local police matter.
Oh, not at all. The investigations required deep, deep coordination between the FBI Cleveland Division, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the U.S. Border Patrol Sandusky Bay Intelligence Unit.
Because following the money trail from a hacked inbox in Ohio to a shell company bank account to a currency exchange in Chicago that requires serious federal firepower.
Absolutely.
And that interagency effort led to a major legal reckoning. In Toledo, after a 4-day trial presided over by U.S. District Judge James R. Knepp II, the jury delivered their verdict on April 24, 2026.
And it was a big one.
Yeah, they convicted 3 key players, Oluwafemi, Michael Oyemi, Arun Drake, and Peter Reed for wire fraud conspiracy.
And Oyemi and Drake were also convicted of money laundering conspiracy.
And it is important to note that those were just the defendants who chose to go to trial. Right?
Yes. The Bronner network was completely dismantled as well.
How many others?
22 other defendants pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering conspiracies. This enforcement action spanned a geographic network from Chicago and Atlanta all the way down to Houston.
And when law enforcement dismantled that network, they didn't just walk away with, like, server logs.
No, they did not.
They brought receipts. The government seized the assets these criminals bought with the stolen money, and it is just a wild list.
The haul was incredible.
They seized nearly $1.2 million worth of cashier's checks, cryptocurrency, and straight cash.
Just lying around.
Yeah. They seized a massive 4,423 square foot residence down in Lawrenceville, Georgia.
A literal mansion.
But the detail that absolutely fascinated me personally was the jewelry. They seized some incredibly specific, eye-wateringly expensive luxury watches.
Right, the physical assets really provide a fascinating glimpse into the culture and ultimately the vulnerability of the syndicate.
They seized a Patek Philippe Nautilus watch valued at $45,000.
Wow.
They grabbed an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak watch worth $30,000.
It's just so much money.
And the absolute crown jewel, a Richard Mille Felipe Massa watch valued at $140,000.
That is insane.
Think about the physical weight of wearing 140 grand on your wrist.
I can't even imagine.
It presents such a wild contradiction to me. Like they used invisible digital ghosts to steal the money. They leveraged extreme patience to weaponize the quiet, mundane space of a work email.
Right, it's so subtle.
But the second they had the cash, they spent it on the most visible, flashy, physical items imaginable.
Well, it is the fatal flaw in almost all major financial crimes, isn't it?
Agreed.
Yeah, and ego. They possessed the ultimate digital discipline to sit quietly in an inbox for months, learning, adapting, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
Right.
But they completely lacked the physical discipline to hide the proceeds.
I just had to show it off.
Exactly. I mean, a luxury watch isn't just a status symbol. It's also a way to transport highly concentrated wealth across borders without, carrying briefcases of cash.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
But it also anchors this highly sophisticated cybercrime firmly in the physical world.
You can't hide a watch that big.
No. And ironically, it is that very human need to show off physical wealth that leaves a paper trail for the FBI and postal inspectors to follow.
Well, while the flashy assets were recovered and the perpetrators are facing federal sentencing, the deeper damage is much harder to fix.
That's the sad truth.
The financial assets were seized, but the breach of trust in our digital communications, that lingers on. Which brings us back to what this all means for you, the listener, the next time you open your laptop.
Yeah, the core takeaway here is that our fundamental relationship with our inbox just has to change.
It has to.
The defenses we've relied on for the past 2 decades are completely obsolete now.
Because we've been trained to look for the obvious red flags, right?
Right.
We look for the grammatical errors, the weird sender addresses that end in a random string of numbers, the urgent, emotionally manipulative pleas from total strangers.
The easy stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have been trained to trust the context of a conversation. If the person knows what we talked about yesterday, we just assume it's them. But when the fraudster has read your last 6 months of emails, when they know your boss's specific nickname and your vendor's exact invoice format,
It changes everything.
the fraud isn't going to look like a scam. It's going to look exactly like your normal daily routine.
And if we look at the trajectory of this methodology, it leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question to mull over.
Okay, what is it?
Well, in the case we just unpacked, human scammers had to do all the heavy lifting.
Right. Manually reading everything.
Yes, they had to manually monitor these inboxes, take the time to read the correspondence, understand the business dynamics, and manually craft the perfect mimicked response.
It's very labor intensive.
Very. But what happens to our basic ability to trust digital communications when these fraud networks start using AI?
Oh, wow. To automate the monitoring and the mimicking at scale?
Precisely.
That is terrifying.
Think about it. If an AI agent can instantly ingest and analyze 10 years of your corporate emails, perfectly map your organizational chart, replicate your exact writing style down to your favorite punctuation marks.
Like using an M- instead of a comma.
Exactly. And autonomously negotiate a fraudulent payment with your vendors in real time.
Wow.
If you can no longer trust the context, the tone, or the history of an email, what is left to trust?
That is a genuinely terrifying thought to leave on.
It really is.
The digital stakeout we talked about today was run by humans, but tomorrow's might be fully automated and infinitely faster.
That's the reality we're heading toward.
It means the next time you go to approve that routine invoice or wire that payment, no matter how perfect the email looks, you might want to pick up the phone and hear a human voice first.
Definitely.
Thank you for exploring these sources with us today on the Deep Dive. Double-check those routing numbers and stay vigilant out there.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.